True North has been sounding the alarm bell about critical race theory, its presence in our schools, and the threat posed by the woke left for a very long time. Today, we'll talk to one of the reporters on the front lines of this issue. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is The Candice Malcolm Show. Hi everyone, thank you so much for tuning into the Candice Malcolm Show. I hope everybody is getting excited about Christmas. Christmas is almost here, and we're going to be delivering content to you right up until Christmas Eve. We have lots of great interviews lined up for the final week, as well as the week between Christmas and New Year's. If you're watching this video on YouTube right now, I'm going to stop you right now. I'm going to ask that you please subscribe to True North. Don't forget to hit that little red notification bell as well so that you never miss one of our episodes. If you're watching on Facebook right now, please like True North, drop us a comment, and share this video. Finally, if you're listening to this podcast, please don't forget to subscribe to The Candice Malcolm Show. And if you're on Google or Apple Podcasts, please leave us a 5-star review if you enjoy the show. Okay, today I am pleased to be joined by one of the star reporters here at True North, Sue-Ann Levy. Sue-Ann is an investigative journalist and reporter with True North. She recently retired after 30 years of investigative reporting and writing columns for the Toronto Sun and Post Media. Sue-Ann is a 2-time Investigative Reporting Award winner and a 9-time winner of Toronto Sun's Reader Choice Award for news writing. Sue-Ann Levy made a name for herself by advocating for the poor, the homeless, the elderly in long-term care facilities, and others without a voice, and for fighting against the rise of anti-Semitism and the BDS movement across Canada. Sue-Ann, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Candice.
So we were talking before air, and you informed me that you joined True North in July. I have to say, I thought it had been longer. It feels like you've been with us for much longer, Sue-Ann, but you're such a great addition to our team, and we really are fortunate to have you reporting for us. So let's talk about the last 6 months that you have been on staff with True North and reporting and doing your investigations for us. Let's go through some of the biggest stories that you have broken. So from your perspective, Sue-Ann, what has been the biggest thing that you've uncovered for True North since joining our team?
Well, I think the explosion of anti-Black racism initiatives has taken even me by surprise. The selective, we'll call it racism, where Black students are singled out, even though they comprise a very small part of the populations of the school boards in the Greater Toronto area. We're talking about Toronto School Board, we're talking about the Peel School Board, and all the initiatives and all the pandering that has occurred and all the time and resources that have gone into developing special woke initiatives to deal with Black students and Black staff. So that has actually really surprised me, but I shouldn't be surprised because during COVID, during the pandemic, a lot of these things were percolating behind closed doors. And, and then I guess a lot of parents and a lot of people in the public have just woken up to the fact that this is occurring now that kids have gone back to school this fall.
Well, it's interesting because it was all, from my perspective, it was all in response to the killing of George Floyd in the US the previous summer. And that sort of launched this huge social movement across the US, and it spilled over into Canada, into the UK, into Europe, probably into Australia as well, where we were having discussions about police brutality and some of the issues around that. And it just seems like this thing has taken on a life of its own, where it's the new trendy leftist thing, critical race theory, this teaching in critical race theory, this idea that somehow if you're Black, you deserve different treatment, which to your point, that's the definition of racism, to single out a group of people. Canada is an incredibly diverse country. Toronto is one of the most diverse cities in the entire world. And here we are cutting out different policies, different rules, different treatment for one group of people. I can't imagine it's going to end well. I can't imagine it's good for anyone. It's certainly not good for Black students who are told that they live in an oppressive system that's against them. What are some of the specific things that you've uncovered here at True North? And I know it makes your head shake, but maybe you can sort of walk us through some of the crazy things that they're doing.
Well, the Peel School Board, for example, only teachers who have, I guess, intervened in some act of oppression and who have studied equity and diversity, specifically anti-Black racism, are being promoted to principal and vice principal. So there's a specific selective view of what comprises leadership rather than academics, mentoring, that kind of thing. That is totally been ignored, and that's happening this fall at the Peel School Board. At the Toronto School Board, the new director, who came from Peel and is a Black activist and allies herself with a Black Lives Matter movement, hired Desmond Cole to give a series of talks. In September, 4 talks for which he earned $16,000 of taxpayer money, and during which he deviated into a rant about Palestine, and a very anti-Semitic rant. He even brought up me, that I was the most hateful columnist in Canada because I had covered other anti-Semitism at the board, and went on and on and on, to the shock and chagrin of many of the people who attended. The director never apologized to the Jewish community. It was a terribly anti-Semitic rant. He did it on the Monday, September 20th, and then was allowed to continue with the 2 talks on September the 23rd, which was shocking to me that they didn't put a stop to it.
I mean that's wild, and I know that you and Desmond Cole have not quite seen eye to eye, but he seems a little bit obsessed with you, Sue-Ann. I must say the fact that he just sort of randomly brought you up there was a little bit strange. I think you live rent free in his head. And so, Sue-Ann, you've covered some other big stories for us. The memorable one for me was this incredible story of the tent cities and the squatters who really took over Toronto parks. And, you know, I understand that the pandemic was a really rough time for a lot of people and that a lot of people really struggled. The homeless population did increase. And it just seemed like a terrible way to deal with it by allowing people to live in parks, and as you reported, a lot of it devolved into crime. It wasn't even necessarily, you know, the people who were showing up weren't necessarily even the homeless people themselves. They were the hard left activists that were just there for a fight against the police. And you covered this issue in depth. So why don't you walk us through that story and then let us know what the latest development is with these tent cities?
Well, good news is that a number of the parks have been cleaned out for the winter. The bad news is that they're still occupying several parks in downtown Toronto. What happens is they move from park to park. And while I was, with you, I had the fortunate occasion to go into Dufferin Grove Park, where there was a group of Indigenous people who chased myself and our videographer out of the park, screaming, that we were filming their sacred fire. And for one thing, I didn't even know there was a fire there, but for the other, it really showed how these people have taken control of these parks and think they're their own, and they get very agitated because they're upset with us coming in and writing about it when in fact they're public parks. The thing that concerns me is, aside from all the crime, the drug dealing, the unsafe conditions, unsanitary, the rats, there are hotel shelters that have been put in place across the city by the City of Toronto, costing $220 a night. There's one that has been very controversial down on the Esplanade of Toronto, which is a tourist area, a top tourist area, in the Novotel. Now, the owners of the Novotel, the Silver Hotel Group, have rented out several of their hotels, leased them out to the city during COVID because they, of course, weren't getting tourists. And those hotels have been turned into a crime scene. It's absurd. So first of all, there are hotels where these people can go. And the fact that some are still in parks is just obscene in my view. But then you've got these people in these upscale hotels in tourist areas, in nice districts, law-abiding communities, just wreaking havoc on the communities. There's been crime. I mean, there's a group of people down by the Esplanade who live in, very nice condo buildings attached to the Novotel, who've documented weekly what's going on down there. Fires, arson, smash and grabs, they have a whole bike ring operating out of the hotel. Drug dealing. I revealed a couple of weeks ago that they had found 3 long guns in the hotel. I mean, it's absurd, Candice, what is going on. And these mayor and council seem to be turning a blind eye to all of it. They put on a few extra police officers, but other than that, it's continuing.
Well, the lawlessness is what is so striking, Sue-Ann. And I remember when you went down to that park, Dufferin Grove, and you filmed it. The attitude of the leftist thugs, they're so anti-democratic, anti-freedom, that they didn't think that it was your right to film them. It's like, hey, look, I'm a journalist. I do have a right to be here. We're in a public park. Like, I can't imagine, the alternative if a group of right wing activists, physically stopped journalists from recording them and tried to say that they don't have a right to do their journalism. What the response would have been? I know it would have been the biggest story in the country, of course, when it happens to us. The other journalists don't bat an eye, but. Yeah, you alluded to something else that I think is a really troubling trend, and that is the enabling of hard drug use. And I know that this is a story that you've covered a lot. I know there was that crazy story out in Vancouver of a city councilor actually helping to hand out heroin and other very, very serious drugs on the streets of Vancouver. Where does this trend come from, Sue-Ann? What is going on in the world where politicians enable this kind of hard drug use? It's wild.
It is all coming up from the States, unfortunately. And our city, as I've pointed out in the past, is fast becoming like a Seattle, like a Portland, like San Francisco. Thankfully, there's a conservative mayor who's been voted in Seattle, who has vowed to clean up these encampments and the drug use. But here, unfortunately, we've got all these safe injection sites and harm reduction sites located in shelters where homeless people are allowed to take their drugs, they're illegal drugs, but safely. And they go into rooms and they're shot up with clean needles, then sent back out on the street, or in the case of the shelters, they're allowed to roam the streets. And so they've taken their drugs, but safely. But what does this attract? This attracts drug dealers to these sites. And I've actually physically been down to some of these sites and seen where they operate. The drug dealers were operating out of a bus shelter at Dundas and Sherburne, as I discovered a summer ago. So it's increased drug dealing. Of course, it's increased turf battles. And I take great exception to the enabling of drug addicts. There's supposed to be a component of rehab that's not included. The drug harm reduction industry is in just full throttle trying to intimidate those, including me, who speak up against this enabling philosophy. And you asked about what to watch. Well, the Toronto Board of Health is looking to get some sort of approval from the government of Canada to make illegal drugs, to decriminalize illegal drug use in the city. So this is something we've got to watch over the next couple of months. And knowing Trudeau and knowing his government, that could happen.
It's like they all outdo themselves to find out who can be the most progressive and the most insane. I mean, the idea that we're enabling drug use and saying it's okay and facilitating it and creating incentives for it, Sue-Ann, what does that say about us as a society? I mean, wow. You mentioned that Seattle elected a new mayor that was more on the conservative side. That's interesting. I know we have a couple of elections coming up in Ontario in 2022. So I'm looking forward to your coverage already, Sue-Ann, but why don't you walk us through what those elections are and who's running? Do we have any new candidates running for mayor in Toronto?
Well, not at the moment, but we are really crying for somebody to come in and clean up the city. I am not, as I've made it clear, a fan of the current mayor or the current council. I think they've bent over backwards to the special interest groups, and the city has deteriorated immensely. The roads are a mess. We've got drug addicts roaming the downtown core. We have, as I've talked about, encampments. And this whole enabling philosophy has just taken Toronto down a very dark path. And there are a lot of people who would agree with me. But it sounds like John Tory is thinking of running again, and I think he needs a strong conservative to come up against him, someone like the gentleman in Seattle who came, and I think people are crying for that kind of change. So I'm hoping to see over the next couple months someone come out of the woodwork. I'm calling for candidates As far as Ontario is concerned, this is going to be, and I'll just backtrack to John Tory for a minute, because here he is spending his time pushing vaccines for small children instead of dealing with the real issues of the city. The man has become a vaccine cheerleader. It's actually sickening to watch his social media feed. And they've all succumbed to this pandemic. I don't know, they're so absorbed by the pandemic that nothing else matters. And the same for Doug Ford, although he's a little bit better with some other things. And I think that the election, the Ontario election, is going to be a real test of how he's dealt with the pandemic, how he's dealt with leadership. Of course, what's haunting him is how terribly the long-term care homes were afflicted by pandemic. I myself lost my father to COVID in a facility, not one of the worst ones, one of the better ones. But I mean, how many people lost their lives? It was thousands of seniors lost their lives in these terrible long-term care facilities. And I don't see much movement, frankly, in terms of how they've improved over the last year. Lots of talk, not a lot of action. That should be one of the top issues. I'm not sure it will be, because, seniors don't really matter. It'll be, how many crumbs he provides in terms of daycare, whether he appeals to the woke crowd. You know how it works.
Absolutely. Well, Doug Ford is usually pretty good about not going down that woke path. Although when it comes to policy, he's much more susceptible to flip flopping. Where he came out and he said no to the vaccine passports. He said he didn't want to divide society up that way. And then a few weeks later, he kind of came around to the expert opinion that was the only way to go. And that's just one example. It's happened many times. So who are the major contenders against Doug Ford? Because he's got the name recognition. He's done a pretty good job, just generally speaking. And we have a new liberal leader that's perhaps not as well known, and an NDP leader that's a little bit stagnant. So do you think that either of those contenders have a real shot against Ford?
No, I don't think so. I actually don't think so. I mean, the unions will try. They've always tried to rule Ontario, particularly the teachers' unions. But I see their pushback very weak in terms of on social media and things like that. Andrea Horvath really should step down at this point and find a more inspiring leader. She's run a couple of elections, and I mean, last election was the election she was supposed to win or come close to winning. She didn't even come close. She's not inspiring. Stephen Del Duca is just, I don't know where he is. He is just totally uninspiring, uncreative. He's not leadership material. And look they have a caucus of what? I don't know, 6 people, maybe. Kathleen Wynne is going to call it quits. Thank goodness. She's not running again. And, who do they have? Who is going to run? It boggles my mind that the federal Liberals did so well in Toronto, really, when the provincial Liberals were just basically shut out. I can't understand. It's a great disconnect.
Well, it's all that conventional wisdom that people in Ontario are so middle of the road that they're happy to vote. If they vote federally for the Liberals, they're going to vote provincially for the Tories, or maybe it's because all the talented politicians for the Liberals have gone federal because they have a better shot at winning there. Well, Sue-Ann, thank you so much for joining us at True North. It's so great to have you part of the organization, part of the team, and I know you're going to do great things for us in 2022. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Candice.
All right. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is The Candice Malcolm Show.